I'm about to vomit a lot of film theory in your direction, but something that I talk about with probably every single black person in my life who is a big movie, TV media nerd is why are we all genuinely moved by projects that we know are terrible? And I fear I have an answer for you, but that answer is quite jargon heavy. I'm gonna vomit a lot of film theory your way. In particular, I'm about to talk a lot about gaze theory, which in film refers to the relationship between the camera, the creator, and the spectator, and essentially how you build a relationship and tell stories through that concept, the concept of the gaze. Most people really struggle with this concept, I think, because they're introduced to it through the internet's definition of the male gaze, which has removed that term from the essay most people are referencing when they use it so incredibly that it's kind of just inaccurate now. A lot of people also seem to either not know or not care that Laura Mulvey, the woman who wrote the essay Visual Pleasure in Narrative Cinema, which is the essay that really brought the term the male gaze into popular use, she's distanced herself from that essay and that work because of what I'm going to talk about. That essay has come under incredibly heavy critique from a lot of black feminists in film scholarship and film academia because her analysis and framework for the male gaze is completely devoid of any thought, quite frankly, about any woman who is not white. I'm not calling Laura Mulvey a racist, but when she sat down and she wrote that essay, and when you read it, you can tell she's only talking about, she's only thinking about, she's only referencing, she's only analyzed white women in movies. Don't sit here and talk to me about a male gaze or representations of women in film if you're really just talking about white women. Let's call a spade a spade. And in particular, there's an essay, again, by Bell Hooks called The Oppositional Gaze, which is largely talking about the experience of black female spectatorship. And one of the things she points out is that one of the things you are accidentally talking about when you talk about the concept of gaze, when you talk about the concept of the camera, who's behind it, and how they use those things to talk to an audience, is you have to consider how systems of power and oppression impact who has access to cameras. Right? This is a part of what Toni Morrison was talking about with the concept of the white gaze, even if she wasn't talking about film necessarily. There is an understanding and expectation not only that most movies or pieces of media will be made by white people, but that white people are the dominant audience for media. We can sit here and we can yap about film theory all day, and I will. But at the end of the day, movies are made by human beings who are impacted by the same circumstances that all human beings are. And so if you're trying to do any kind of media or film analysis without acknowledging the fact that we live in a world that limits who is able to make movies, not just in that, you have to pitch things and get them produced, but in film is a lot more expensive to make and produce than most other art forms, right? It's also very difficult to make films alone, which is not necessarily true of all other art forms. Film is a very unique and new technology and art form, and if you're not considering that and how the financial aspects and how racism and misogyny and the patriarchy and capitalism impact who's able to have access to the level of wealth and luxury you typically need to be able to make a movie, if you're not thinking about that, you're cutting out a really important part of the picture. A part of the mise-en-scène, if you will. That joke is not even funny. I'm gonna leave it in though. But basically, a lot of black people I know are able to very deeply care about and empathize with pieces of media that are attempting to speak to our experiences, even when it's done poorly, and we're not necessarily trying to say, that's a good thing and that was done well, is the same reason why Chris from Get Out, template for black horror there, why Chris from Get Out felt like such a new, refreshing horror protagonist. A huge part of what makes Get Out work and what differentiates Chris from the average horror movie protagonist outside of just the surface level analysis of he's a black man is that Jordan Peele, who is also a black man, was able to write a black character with the realistic higher level of consciousness and alertness towards danger that all black people have to move with. And that higher level of consciousness is a huge part of why most Black people I know can't take white people's horror movies seriously anyway, is because white people walk around throwing themselves into situations that are destined to create horrific scenarios. And when you are somebody who has to walk around going, I can't do that, I'm gonna die, it's really hard to feel shocked and horrified and surprised when somebody does something that you know damn well is gonna end up with them dead. Black people, particularly like Black women and queer folks, don't really have the privilege of walking around with the illusion that we are more or better represented than we are. And so you learn to look at things more critically, and that gets stereotyped as like nagging or a bad thing, but it's not, because thinking about things critically, genuinely, all the way through is frequently what leads the Black people I know to finding those kernels of good in stories where most people are just like, no, I just think that's silly. It's just dumb. Like, I know Zombies is a movie for kids, but also we're living in a post-Trolls World 2 world. There's no excuse for anybody's racism allegories to be that bad anymore. Because I know 3-year-olds who were in the theater for Trolls 2, okay? I was watching Disney Channel original movies well into my teens, and I know most of you were too. We can do a nuanced approach to race and racism in children's movie. It's just that a lot of white people don't because of the white gaze, because white people don't expect or demand that as an audience, and that's largely who channels like the Disney Channel are trying to make media for. So when we Black people are able to look at these stories and these poor representations of ourselves and see and find the good in the way that it aligns with our experiences, at that point, it's not a reflection of the film. It's not a reflection of the movie. That's a testament to you and the amount of like empathy and work that you are doing to relate to these characters and these figures on screen. Because the other time that the word oppositional comes up a lot when you're talking about media analysis is when you're talking about a dominant reading versus an oppositional reading. A dominant reading is basically an analysis of a film or a text where you are thinking about and trying to figure out what it is the creator of the text is trying to tell you. An oppositional read is when you throw that out and you kind of use your own personal experiences, your own baggage to form an analysis in a story. I personally think the best media analysis, the media analysis I've done that's popped off on this app, is the media analysis that manages to combine the two. But when you're doing an oppositional reading, when you're throwing out the intent of the filmmakers, what you have to be willing to acknowledge is now we're just talking about you. Empathizing and considering experiences outside of your own is something that Black people have to do and have been forced to do to such an incredible degree that I feel like a lot of us don't even acknowledge it as being work anymore. Like, it's just something that we do, and genuinely, like, give yourself some credit. You're not just like crying over a poorly written zombie because you're silly. You're crying over a poorly written zombie because you're a person with a beating heart and the ability to empathize to other people who don't look like you or share your experiences. You're able to look at somebody and say, they're trying though, and I see the humanity in that. That's not silly. That's fucking...
Coming from the side of the pro dancers, I have a question for you all watching the show.
I'm so new to the Dancing with the Stars train, but I've had a glass of rosé and I'm feeling opinionated, so I'm gonna answer these questions. I don't know if you heard, but there were cop sirens outside like the second I started filming, and that's really funny to me for no reason. Like, are your takes ever so controversial the police get involved before you post the video? But I don't know, controversial apparently. I really don't care if stars come onto this show with dance experience, and I think it's really silly that people get irritated by that. You understand that, like, when you're talking about stars, like, who is a star? What qualifies as a star? Most of those people are entertainers. And when you want to be an entertainer, that's like often something that people want to do from a young age. And when you are like drawn towards, you know, stage spotlight or being in front of the camera from a young age, there's a couple of things that you tend to just get thrown into as a kid, and dance classes are one of them. Also, quite frankly, especially like in the southern part of this country, there's still a lot of heavy, not even just remnants of, but active participation in like debutante culture, and the idea that like a part of a young lady's upbringing is learning how to do like waltzes and ballroom dances and shit. So I'm gonna be honest, it feels not just silly, but genuinely like naive and a denial of reality to expect that the majority of the contestants of Dancing with the Stars should have no dance experience. Like, there's only so many pro athletes who are going to be available every season. Like, I'm not saying this to try and compare myself to Chandler Kinney, who, let's be honest, most of this discourse about like, should you win a mirror ball if you have previous dance experience is centering around. Like, I'm not trying to compare myself to her or say that I'm on her level. I'm just like trying to empathize the best that I can with my own lived experience. I'm about 2 years older than her. I was in dance lessons until I was 11 years old. And then around the same age she would have been in Zombies was the age that I was in high school theater and actively taking like dance lessons and rehearsals for that. I don't know that if you were to put me in a ballroom competition now, that would be of any use to me. I really don't. I also think the like ethos that Dancing with the Stars is about people with no dance experience gaining it is like silly and has repeatedly been proven untrue. Like, Charli D'Amelio has a mirror ball, and I'm not mad at her. I just think it's weird that you guys cheered for that, and now that it's like a black girl in her position, it's an issue. But also, I just generally find it frustrating that the audience acts like the judges don't and haven't consistently scored contestants on this show with existing dance experience differently than the way they score other contestants. Like, it's really the audience acting like the judges don't know that or haven't talked about it before. Like, again, I got into Dancing with the Stars this year, and I've seen Carrie Ann say during a show that the way she scores is with the understanding that like a 5 is going to look different for everybody. Everybody's got their own version of a 9, a 10, etc. It seems clear to me, based on the way that Chandler is being scored, they are being particularly hard on her because they know she is one of the contestants who has more dance experience than the others. And so I don't really understand the need to then further pile onto that by being a difficult audience for her. Because, like, a lot of these conversations center around, like, that's not what Dancing with the Stars is about. And again, I'm new here, so take this with a grain of salt, but some of the most inspiring stories I've seen on Dancing with the Stars have not necessarily been from the people who are like conquering their fears and getting into dance. Like, yeah, I find those stories very inspiring and very moving, and I like watching those people win mirror balls, but there's also something really beautiful to me, probably in part because it was my own experience, that dance is a lot like singing, and that it's something that a lot of us fall in love with at a very young age, and then the harsh reality of life sets in and forces us to confront the fact that we're probably not going to give a life where we get to dance for a living, where we get to do that every day. And for 10 weeks, people get to do that. Like, people who at one point maybe really wanted to get to dance. And again, particularly for black girls, I quit dance because there were no black teachers in my area, and I was tired of only being put in the front during Jungle Boogie. I honestly am very moved and very touched and very happy to get to watch like a black girl not that much younger than me reconnect with an art form she loves in a way that seems to be entirely rooted in like finding her power and flexing this skill that she has that she's always wanted to pursue. Because again, I didn't hear this conversation come up when JoJo Siwa, who is famous for her dance experience, was on the show, because there was an ability to acknowledge that she was breaking ground by being like a woman who wanted to dance with another woman on that show. The fact that we can't see the value in the fact that like there's not a lot of black women who have won the mirror ball, and I'm pretty sure if Chandler and Brandon win, they will be the first entirely black team to win a mirror ball, right? We can sit here and we can pretend that Dancing with the Stars doesn't have a race problem, and that's fine, but at the end of the day, Britt Stewart is their first black woman pro dancer. It's been an issue in the ballroom. The issue is that we just are not there, and Chandler is not just there, but doing it well and doing it with like passion and precision every week, and I care way more about what that's probably doing for black girls younger than me than anything y'all have to say. I hope there are thousands, if not hundreds, of little black girls learning to paso doble to that song from Zombies 2, And who do we have to thank for that? Chandler Kinney. I yapped about that way longer than I intended to, but the second question was, do you vote for the same star week to week, or do you like flop on who you're gonna vote for? And I'm gonna be honest, I don't vote for one star ever. I have a list of clients that I decided upon the first week, and I dedicate my efforts to ensuring their survival every single week. I'm gonna see Chandler, Jen, and Alona in the final. I will. I love this question because it really cuts right to the core of what Monster Theory is, and also allows me to talk about Trolls World Tour, which I always kind of want to do on some level. I won't lie. I really like that movie. This is not a joke. Like, I ironically think that's the best allegory for racism that's been put forth in children's media probably to date. Anyway, in order to answer the question, are the trolls monsters, we have to revisit our working definition of what a monster is. I tend to work with Noel Carroll's definition of a monster, which is an extraordinary creature who participates in cultural taboo, and I kind of add this part myself, and therefore is pushed to the margins of society because of it, right? Monsters are marginalized. That's a part of the reason why queer people love them so much. But plowing right along, so I don't go down that rabbit hole, because I will spend about like 6 years in there, by that definition, trolls, to me, are not the monster or monsters in that film, right? The Bergens are not just antagonists, they are, by definition, monstrous, in that they are extraordinary large creatures to what is actually, within the world of the film, presented to be like the default species, right? Really what I'm getting at is a term that comes up a lot in academic film theory that I think is lacking from a lot of internet media analysis is verisimilitude. Verisimilitude in film theory refers to a movie's ability to create the illusion of truth. And what I think is really integral to understand about that theory is that the intention is not necessarily to create a one-to-one mirror or recreation of reality, right? If you're using how much does this film line up with my understanding of reality, you're probably missing the point, because most films, even films that take place in what seems to be like our normal everyday world, like The Umbrella Academy, for example, add in little details that are meant to cue to you that this is not necessarily your world, it's a mockery of it, it's a mimicry of it, it's creating an approximation of it that allows more extraordinary things to happen for the purpose of the film. Within the reality of the world of trolls, the trolls are like normal. They're so normal, not just in terms of like, you know, like physiology, but in terms of, again, what's really significant about monsters, participation in taboo. All them trolls be doing is dancing and singing and bopping around until they started colonizing. Okay? So, this is where it gets fun. The Bergens in the first Trolls movie are by definition monsters. They are extraordinary large creatures who participate in the cultural taboo of eating trolls. Also, if you ask me, they're kind of like very clearly a symbol and like allegory for the British Empire. Always the monsters. Ooh, the British. That's actually kind of funny. I thought about the British for 3 seconds and got so angry and distracted I had to cut. I was making a point about Trolls World Tour. The Bergens would be the monster in the first Trolls movie. In Trolls World Tour, the monster is arguably both the pop and the rock trolls, right? Because the rock trolls are arguably extraordinary creatures, and that it seems that they've managed to advance their like troll society for war in a way that other trolls haven't. This is the really fun thing about film theory, is that words like extraordinary do a lot of heavy lifting. But the rock trolls are arguably extraordinary creatures who participate in the taboo of trying to colonize other trolls and steal their strings which is something that happens because the pop trolls did it, right? And so what's fascinating about asking the question, are the trolls monsters, is the answer is both yes and no. And that's what really cuts right to the core of monster theory, is that a huge part of monster theory is understanding the baby, we're all monsters. Because all monsters are human, right? Like, most of us agree and understand that, like, trolls, werewolves, vampires, zombies, those aren't real. What they are projections of the human psyche. And so a lot of the things that we find terrifying about monsters exist in us. And that's a huge part of why it's so fascinating to so many people. Is in particular why I think monster theory is so popular with non-white and queer people, even though those are two demographics that tend to be treated very poorly in horror media. It's also why there tends to be a lot of romances between women and monsters and not vice versa. Because these are all demographics who have to a certain extent, because they are not the dominant class, deal with looking at monstrosities, creatures that throw or pose threats to them, and still seeing the humanity, right? But that intersection of queer theory and monster theory is also why I think it's so compelling to present monstrosity as like a fluid concept, as something that is not necessarily fixed to any one exact character, but more so like a state of being that your individual relationship to can change at any time, right? Like, Final Girls in many ways are so compelling and so resonant in our society because it's about how a lot of times, if you're gonna be like a soft, delicate young girl, as a lot of us were one day before the big bad world, the slasher, the evil guy came to get us, you're going to have to get your hands dirty. And there are going to be times where you start to see yourself become a monster and do the things that were done to you just to get by. And what do you do when you find yourself in that position? I think that's a huge part of what is so resonant about Final Girls. And it's also a really recurrent theme in monster media, is not just like who is monster and who is human, but what's the difference, and does that difference matter at all? And there's a specific field of study called a queer study, spelled Queare study, and it's referencing an essay that is specifically written about a Black queer man analyzing how a specific Black queer lens on analyzing media differentiates from a queer lens, but approaching it from specifically that angle, because that's who I am. Monster theory is incredibly freeing for the same reason Trolls World 2 was. Right? Because what sets Trolls World Tour, well, the big thing that sets Trolls World Tour apart as a racism allegory is the conclusion is not that differences don't matter, it's that differences do matter, and it's still not a reason to disrespect or hurt people. The idea that, like, yeah, we're all monsters. And at the end of the day, we still owe each other a certain degree of kindness and understanding over fear. I believe that, and that's why I'm 6 days late to this discourse, but I feel like my brain is going to explode. That lady saying she thinks Black women have bigger vaginas because Black men are stereotyped to have bigger penises was the last straw. It's time for a national ban on microphones. I don't give a shit about limiting your freedoms. I'm sorry, what do you mean that, like, society is actively falling apart around us? It's an election year, which is just like, God, it being an election year just feels like having an extra mental illness for an entire year. And still, we're having to explain, like, playground anti-Blackness. You understand? People have been on the moon. We've gone to space. And some of you still think...
It's definitely not too much to ask, but this is one of those times where I'm going to remind the audience that I'm about to break down what is usually like a 2-hour lecture or an entire week of class into a video that has to be under 10 minutes. So bear with me, because I'm still not going to get all of it. But first and foremost, just to cover a little bit of background information, the essay that most people are referencing when they're talking about the male gaze and the framework as we understand it, which is basically like when men make movies, they make them for other men, and thus their gaze is prioritized, and women often become dehumanized, objectified, sexy lamps, etc., etc. That understanding of the term is usually coming from an essay written by Laura Mulvey in 1975 called Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. One of the two. But basically, I've always had a problem with that essay because it was written in 1975, which is one of the times in film history where like Black Hollywood was booming. It was impossible not to notice how race was impacting depictions of people, particularly women, on screen. And still, that essay is completely devoid of any analysis on the axis of race. White academics don't want to hear this, but especially when you're talking about art and performance, areas that have been incredibly heavily influenced by race, racism, and racist tropes because of the popularization of the minstrel show, not just in America, but across the globe. The denial and erasure of Black experiences and how Black people present on screen is always upholding white supremacy. I know y'all don't want to hear that, but refusing to talk about the problem is a part of the problem more often than not. But getting a little further into the weeds here, in particular the concept of the male gaze and the way that it's been like embraced and repeated and like just really taken off with white women, particularly white feminists, is to me reflective of one of the biggest and most dangerous things about white feminists and white feminism, which is the constant and insistent need to homogenize the experience of being a man, right? And I understand that like we do this a lot colloquially in conversation, but when you're talking about like feminism and anti-patriarchal movements, it's not only like not fair and not okay to homogenize the experience of being a man, it's why so many feminists are still so racist. And this is something that Black feminists have been writing about in reference to and outside of film academia for years now. The refusal to acknowledge that non-white men do in fact face a form of gendered oppression has a really heavy impact on our continued oppression, whether you're talking about non-white men or women. And I feel like that has never been more clear than with the images we are seeing come out of Palestine right now. We've seen so much footage and heard so many stories of what is being done to Palestinian men who have become prisoners of war, and a lot of it is very sexual violence. A lot of it is being paraded through the streets naked and humiliated, and it's not being talked about or discussed as a form of sexual violence because it's happening to men who aren't white. Or, for example, the fetishes and stereotypes that get pushed onto Black men, right? Like, particularly the Mandingo stereotype, this concept of, like, Black masculinity being a hyper masculinity, being something that is almost superhuman and therefore needs to be destroyed. That is a form of gendered oppression. And it leads to gendered oppression for Black men, right? Like, that is something that's not happening to them because they're Black. It's happening to them because they're a Black man and their masculinity presents in a way that deviates from the dominant form of masculinity. Probably one of the most heartbreaking things about working in a middle school was realizing, God, I'm about to cry, like realizing just through the stories that like young Black boys would tell me how frequently Black boys and men are sexually assaulted and don't realize it because they think that that is something that only happens to women. But also because society allows, permits, and enables a certain degree of fetishization of Black men at all times. Like, the way that people talk about and run with the stereotype about like Black men having big penises is actually quite foul and translates to a lot of textbook sexual harassment and sexual assault for Black men in locker rooms. Now, how do all these real-world concepts relate to film? Well, films are made by human people who carry their biases, thoughts, beliefs, values, etc., into the filmmaking process, whether they want to or not. That's the nature of being human. And when you try to homogenize a male gaze and you try to say that men look at film this way, what you're erasing is the fact that not only do white men often dehumanize, objectify, devalue, and fetishize Black men in their films, white women do too.
a lot. Really, what I think so many white women like about the male gaze and why they're so adamant that we can't let that term go is because it's a term that like creates a false binary that allows them to weaponize their victimhood, which is historically something white women have been all too eager to weaponize, right? Because basically the male gaze creates this false binary where if women are not behind the camera, they are victims of it. And while, yeah, absolutely, misogyny impacts the way movies are made, that framework, I think, has allowed a lot of white women to dodge and avoid how they, one, perpetuate their own biases and internalize misogyny through their gaze, but also it puts this binary where it's like, oh, if there's a woman being represented well on camera and then there's a bunch of non-white women who aren't, we're still supposed to consider this film feminist, right? Like my professor's big feminist flick, a movie he defended adamantly, was the most feminist groundbreaking film of all time, was The Piano. I don't know if you've ever like watched The Piano or in particular paid attention to the depictions of indigenous women in that movie. But don't sit there and tell me it's feminist while I'm looking at that. And I remember making that argument to him. And he just like didn't know what to do with it. Like he for real just like started like sputtering and stuttering. And what's particularly frustrating is I've talked about this before and people seem adamant to like hold fast to the idea of like, well, yeah, I know it doesn't account for like race or like queer identity or like any other oppression outside of like a white woman's understanding of the patriarchy, but isn't there still value in that? I'm gonna touch your hand when I say this. No. Analysis of your position as a white woman in the world of film that doesn't acknowledge that you are a white woman and that's impacting your experience has no value. None. You are not learning anything from that because denying the reality of race makes a lot of what she says, like, quite frankly, inaccurate. To put forth a film theory where the only filmmakers, film figures, and audience members you're considering are white people and then calling it the male gaze would be like doing a survey where you ask only white men anything and then saying 80% of men say, well, it's like 80% of men didn't say that. 80% of a very specific demographic of men said that. Does a single puzzle piece, like a single puzzle piece without the rest of the puzzle or the box it comes in, have any value to you? Or would you just toss it? That's how the male gaze feels to me. It's a singular puzzle piece with no context, none of the very necessary context it needs around it to actually create the whole picture. And mind you, I just spent like 8 minutes talking about how like the erasure of race in that conversation is damaging to men. Okay, if it's that damaging to men, what do you think it does to non-white women? Like, white women are so busy yapping about the male gaze, they have yet to acknowledge that we have yet to see a film made by a white woman, even a white woman who calls herself a feminist, that doesn't also at some point take pot shots, cheap shots, or sideline the non-white characters. Don't worry, darling, I'm talking about you, but Barbie, you can catch it too, because that smallpox line was weird. Like, if the male gaze accounted for any of the things I'm talking about, it would be a much better and much more progressive theory because it would acknowledge the reality of the situation, which is that, like, historically speaking, white men make movies for other white men, and it leads to the dehumanization of anybody who's not those people. And because white women are frequently more interested with gaining the privileges of white men than they are finding solidarity with racialized people to like topple the patriarchy, white women also impose those tropes when it benefits them.
So you're telling me P. Diddy threw parties where he drugged and raped people, raped Meek Mill, raped Usher when he was a kid, and then Usher grew up to discover Justin Bieber and bring him straight to the diddler, raped Justin and likely passed him around. Go back and watch Justin Bieber's Yummy music video, it makes more sense now. And then also Kevin Hart was involved with this. And then later Kevin Hart went on Comedy Central roasted Justin Bieber and just made fun of him. There's so much, but I can't stop thinking about how much I hate Kevin Hart and how everyone's been like hating on me for a while for always saying Kevin Hart's not funny. Not only is he not funny, but he's a sick monster. And there's just so much, way more than I even mentioned. It's like everything ties back to this, and I know this is not it. Like Jaguar Wright said, P. Diddy's the acceptable monster at this time. I'm so, like, eager on the edge of my seat to find out who else and what else. And I have a feeling it's everyone. But today, mainly, I'm just really sad for Justin Bieber.
Charlie XCX does not represent me as a brown girl. I tried so hard to like her. I really wanted to like her. Then Kamala co-opted Brat. White women ran with the record. And then it comes out that one of the songs is about Charlie's best friend who went to a shooting range and dressed the target up as a Palestinian. And to top it off, she's a pick-me. I do not support all women. If she has no haters, I'm dead.
Hands on the football. Okay, sorry about that.
We have a no-touch policy. So if you want a picture done with a cheerleader, we can make that happen. We have a couple of rules. You're not touching the cheerleader. So we bring footballs with us in every stand and pose that we go to.
Don't touch it.
So a man doesn't feel comfortable standing with his hands in front or on side. He can hold the football. And that takes some of the enthusiasm away from trying to put your hands around or on a cheerleader.
Okay, I know I'm so late to this Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders documentary, but oh my god, making men hold a football so they won't touch you during pictures, that's genius. That's honestly the most impressive part of this entire documentary. I want to shake the hand of whoever came up with that. That is so smart. And then they don't feel like mad at you because you weren't like, hey, stop. You were just like, hold this instead. You do something else you like. Hold something else you like.
I've watched this video like 15 times today, and I just have to talk about all of these people's individual reactions to her like eating them up. Okay. First though, you see Saoirse Ronan, like, you can see on her face if you rewatch the video, her contemplating, first trying to get a word in, these bitches won't let her get a word in, and then like contemplating if she's gonna do it, and then just like full sending it and like ate it up. Anyways, now to their reaction. I honestly don't know who this guy is, but he was like only half invested in the joke anyways. Like, he was like politely laughing along, but like had no skin in the game, and he just like focuses up when she starts talking. Good for him. Someone tell me who he is. Then we have Eddie Redmayne, whose jaw could cut someone right now after this. He's so uncomfortable. He was in on the joke, whatever. He was silly, goofy, laughing, but he locked in the moment he realized this was going south. The grip of his jaw as he's uncomfortable, it's like so funny. And now to Paul. I know he's beloved, I get it, but Paul is really leading the charge here. And honestly, he locks in too and he focuses up when Saoirse talks, but he also, if you rewatch the video, he goes in like he's gonna defend himself or like backtrack. He doesn't just focus up and listen. Now he's got something he tries to say in this video if you go watch again, and then he gets drowned out by the crowd and her going like this and whatever else, which you know, is not a good look for Paul Prob. It's not a big deal, but like, you know, this is replaying in his head like constantly right now. It's replaying in my head constantly right now. I'm like, ugh.
When Shaq was posted up with Hawk to a girl like this, looking at her in the face like this is when I knew he was creepy and that he was okay with looking publicly creepy. Yet I was not prepared to watch his interview with Angel Reese where he's like, imagine if you dunked in your booty shorts though. And also she asks, what's your first impression of me? And he says, well, first of all, I thought you were really beautiful. Obviously, Angel Reese has looked up to Shaq through her career, so it must be really heartbreaking to have this man that you have looked up to not only sexualize you, and not only are you so much younger than him, but he has to know that his fans are not going to like give her any leeway in this to feel uncomfortable. And you can tell in the interview that she does feel very uncomfortable, and the comments are like, oh no, whatever, it's just Shaq. I think that it puts her in a really messed up position because she knows that she can't really say anything in a rebuttal of like, why do you feel comfortable saying that to me? And I think it's really telling in 2024 when men are comfortable admitting and saying things on camera that there's much worse going on behind the screen, because like people are much more aware now of what goes on online, and like, you know, drama, gossip, like obviously the gossip pages are picking this up. Shaq is getting slammed for sexualizing Angel Reese. Backlash in the comments. People know that this is going to happen, and so to be comfortable doing it anyway, I'm genuinely worried about how he behaves off camera. Particularly with her. Because they seem to be in a lot of random situations together where he feels comfortable pushing the line. What was your first impression of me? I thought you were very beautiful. Your son is older than her. Okay? She's born after 2000. And then to say, oh, well, imagine dunking in those little booty shorts. Imagine how many people would come then. It's actually gross. Saoirse, my queen, my everything. Now, the reason I love this is not just because she very calmly gagged them. When Paul Mescal, in his effeminate look that's styled for the female gaze, started to sound a little broy, like, oh, who would even think of using the phone to hurt someone? Well, someone in a situation where they're being snuck up on unexpectedly and all they can use is what they have on their person. Who could that be? And the loudness of the ignorance and the silence of Saoirse waiting for her moment. She was trying to interject, and you could tell they weren't even like looking to her or considering her as anyone who would know anything about this, which just shows that they really live in different worlds. Even at this, level of success and fame, they still really live in very different worlds when it comes to their awareness of safety and their surroundings. To make such a joke about, oh, who would even think about having to hurt someone with a phone? And she very calmly tried to interject, I think like 2 or 3 times before she had to speak over them because they were not going to give her an opportunity to even have an opinion on this. Which is the other part of the ignorance, to be like, who would even think of that? And you don't even let the woman talk about it. She has to have the confidence to overspeak you. And if she didn't do that, we probably wouldn't even have seen this moment go viral. Like, I don't be watching the show. Maybe it might be more popular in the UK of a news outlet. I don't really watch this setup very much. And I'm wondering if we would have even seen the moment if she didn't say something, if she didn't speak over them because they were not letting her talk. And I think that Paul Mescal has benefited so much from the female gaze and women loving him, and he's styled in this sort of oh, I'm a little bit of a soft boy, but who would even think about it? We really just do live in different worlds.
The Uglies movie adaptation was doomed from day one. Not because the young adult dystopia genre collapsed and caved in on itself, not because even when that genre was at its peak, these books were always considered weaker examples of it, but rather because I had exactly zero faith in audiences and producers alike to not interpret the title extremely literally. Why are all the Uglies conventionally attractive, clamors the audience? The Uglies were never ugly. Now granted, I also would have preferred they cast Joe Schmo down the street, but it's very important to me that you all understand that the Uglies were never ugly. They're just regular looking people that don't meet an extremely arbitrary and overwhelmingly specific predetermined beauty standard. Does that sound familiar? And likewise, the pretties are not these same conventionally attractive looking people with the TikTok bold glamour beauty filters superimposed on top. They're not made to match our modern interpretation of beauty. If you read, it's heavily insinuated that something about their appearance looks wrong. The best way I can describe this is to imagine if I took a facial mold of the golden ratio and then shaved down each of these actors' facial bones to perfectly match it. Would they meet a technical definition of beauty? Yes. Would they also look profoundly unsettling? Yes. It's bad enough in modern times when we see celebrities that have the same exact smile because they got identical veneers and placements regardless of their original facial shape. These surgeries are extreme and invasive to the extent the only reason this novel takes place in a post-racial world is because ethnic minorities have their skin color altered. The specials are described as being beautiful in a way that invokes the image of cruelty, and to be cruelly beautiful is an oxymoron because we moralize beauty. We don't regard beautiful people as being capable of cruelty. We're always willing to extend them the benefit of the doubt, so to make the remark that the specials seem cruel implies there's something wrong. And I always knew they would never commit to the bit visually, which is somewhat ironic for a movie centered on physical appearance because we hate watching anything that looks even remotely unsettling on people, which I think is just unfortunate. I find it to be a bit of a missed opportunity, especially because I feel the premise has become especially relevant now that we're living in a time where so much of the modern beauty standard is determined by nonsense buzzwords that border on eugenics uncomfortably often. But alas, you win some, you lose some. I'm looking forward to Hoverboards the sequel. So yes, The Uglies is more complicated than we were at war, so we ossified the surviving population to protect the peace. Let's talk a bit about it. The Uglies takes place after total societal collapse. What exactly triggers this collapse is uncertain, but it's thought to be linked to overconsumption or climate catastrophe. Regardless, the world continuously wars over the few remaining resources, and whatever force wins sequesters the survivors into city-states. Each city has a capped population which strictly enforce population control measures. And on top of this, these societies are segregated according to adults that have acclimated to and have accepted their role in the system, and their children that have not. But not because they're necessarily opposed to it, but rather because they're too young to pledge their unwavering loyalty in a way their superiors would take seriously. This society has successfully managed to convince their children that the reason they are structured in the fashion that they are is because people couldn't stop warring over physical appearances and other arbitrary things. Hence why they will be made to match a quote-unquote perfect standard of beauty as they come of age. Note this particular standard of beauty is not in line with anything we would consider to be beautiful. It is so incredibly off from what we consider to be human that to be visibly seen as human either denotes you as a child or a rebel. This is done by design. You can also infer an ethnic cleansing of some kind as previously happened, as all characters have their skin set to a certain baseline color that is described as being paler than olive. Any deviation from the norm is not just punished, it is eliminated. And just as though this weren't enough, the surgery is eventually revealed to be a front for what is essentially a futuristic lobotomy. And that is the way this particular regime maintains control, by keeping the population apathetic, passive, and preoccupied with petty, frivolous things. The thing that kills me the most about the reduction of the pretties to a hedonistic class of people that party 24/7 and have no worries or cares beyond that is that in the books, the party phase of being a pretty is an incredibly short one. Pretties work. It's actually possible that in the books, the pretties wind up working for far longer than we do because they have life-extending technologies that can extend a human lifespan up until the 200s. And that's just the first strike. The second is that in the books, the only reason the pretties have this celebratory period at all is to distract them from the fact they've been brain damaged. Like, a solid 60% of all pretty lingo is just their attempts to explain that their brain feels different and they don't understand why. But the idea is that if you thrust them into a period of partying and presumably intense substance use, they'll lose the ability to distinguish between what is their brain and what is the substances. They'll be in altered states to the extent that their ability to gauge what is normal and what is not will be skewed. And then once that perception has been altered, they can then be indoctrinated as passive, apathetic, productive workers. I don't know about you all, but that does not sound like a fair and equal exchange to me. A few years of partying for decades, if not centuries of labor, in a society where your treatment gets worse the older that you get? I'm sorry, I'm personally going to have to totally pass on this one.
Having a conversation about self-defense and then also in the same conversation talking over and laughing about self-defense when you have a woman alongside you on the same couch, and for the silence that happens after Saoirse Ronan says that that's what all girls have to think about was absolutely so satisfying. Men often joke about the lengths that they would go to in defense of themselves or violence that may happen to them because for them, it is not something that they ever truly take serious. For women, we don't have that luxury. We are constantly thinking about ways that we need to do to protect and defend ourselves. Instead of continuing the conversation, Norton moves to a different topic. And instead of acknowledging out loud what she's talking about and the truth behind it, they stayed in their privilege and remained silent while acknowledging the truth of what she said. Thank you, Saoirse, for giving them the reality check.
Yeah, I shipped Sophia and James when I watched Sophia the First in 6th grade. Kill me. Kill me. I don't care. How was I supposed to know? I didn't know how it worked. I don't have siblings. I thought because now that she was royalty, she had a better chance to get with him. Because now she's royalty, I didn't connect that, like, they're like siblings. I didn't know.
I was just coming from outside to head to my apartment. Why this guy said, hold the door, hold the door. I closed that door so fast in his face. And I said, he's like, you're just not gonna hold the door? I left my keys upstairs. You can open the door with an app. I said, show me the app. Show me the app on your phone. He's like, what app? That's how I know you don't live here. Because you can open the door with an app on your phone. He's like, you really not gonna let me in? I said, no. I stood there for a good minute, looking him up and down. We just in a stalemate. He's like, never mind, I'm just joking. You just look so pretty. I just wanted to get your number and talk to you. Okay. Yeah. You gotta follow your instincts, lady. My instinct said, he don't look like he live here. That may be a wicked thing to think, but I was like, my instinct was like, that nigga don't look like he can live here. Close the door. And right I was, exactly.
You seen the video of the girl who's doing a get ready with me, but while she's doing this get ready with me, she's talking shit about Zendaya and saying how the only people who like Zendaya in Latin America Our girls are brown girls with big noses and big lips and big foreheads, and it's the only reason that they think she's pretty is because they're so insecure that they see themselves in Zendaya, so they think that she's automatically pretty. Mind you, she does start the video with saying Zendaya is not pretty and she's just being objective. And did I get offended by this? Absolutely, because I don't know if you can tell, but I am a girl who is of Latin American descent with brown skin and a bigger nose and a bigger mouth and a bigger forehead. So what this girl is trying to say without saying it is that the only reason brown girls feel pretty or have a reason to feel pretty is because Zendaya is supposedly pretty, meaning that brown girls inherently all on their own aren't pretty enough, as if non-Eurocentric features aren't beautiful. You might be wondering, was this girl white? Absolutely, yes, she was. Not white like American white, like she was speaking full-on Spanish. I think she was from Mexico, like this was a white Mexican girl. This little phenomenon is only happening because there's like a lack of dark brown skin Latin American representation in the media. We don't see dark skinned Latinos, and if they are dark skinned, they're Afro Latinos. There's no mestizo or mulatto like representation. So God forbid us thinking that we look like Zendaya, even if we don't. I don't think I look like a Zendaya, but when I saw Zendaya for the first time, I did think she was Mexican.
I understand that this is going to sound kind of crazy, and I am on my second margarita, full disclosure, but there are too many people and too many situations. I know that sounds crazy, but just hear me out. Hear me out. It's how I feel. Because I swear, every video on my For You page right now is a person that I don't know talking about a situation I know nothing about involving an influencer or celebrity I've never heard of in my life. Like, every video I see on my For You page right now is someone being like, so I just want to address and give my thoughts on the Margot Threatmont situation. Who the fuck is Margot Threatmont? Why is she in a situation? Why would she do that? Why would she be in a situation? I don't know who this person is. And now I know everything about them and everything about their past and their old tweets that have resurfaced, which is crazy because I don't give a fuck about Margot Threatmont. Like, who are these people? Why are they always in situations?
I'm uncertain that you can call sex work feminist. Hi, I'm Grace. Welcome to Bitching in Bed, the series where I talk about things that make you uncomfortable from the place where I am most comfortable. I have seen so much online lately about Bonnie Blue, Lily Phillips, and this normalization of sex work and OnlyFans and this misperception of women in the sex industry, and so I wanted to give my 2 cents. I've seen a lot of input into this discussion following the sort of lines of #girl power, #this is empowering, as she should. You should be able to do what you want with your body. And while all of these things are true, that women should have autonomy over their bodies, women should decide what they get to do with their bodies, all people should get to decide what happens to their own bodies. The conversation is vastly different when we're applying these phrases, these feminist buzzwords, to sex work. Sex work is not #feminist. Research shows that women who sell sex are 18 times more likely to be murdered than women who don't sell sex. There's also research to show that men that participate in paid sexual acts are more likely to abuse their partners, rape, and assault women. I don't understand how you could hear those statistics alone and still support the idea that the sex industry is a feminist and empowering industry. The sex industry is built on misogyny. It is a historically oppressive system that favours the ideals of the patriarchy, re-establishing this idea that women are commodities to be bought, sold and traded. The access and the choice to do sex work is not inherently the issue. If you wish to choose to be a sex worker, you have the right to that choice. But we cannot forget the fact that that system is historically built on the oppression of women. That system has never once been in place to support women. I also think people forget that sex work is not something that's exclusive to westernized cultures. When we think of sex work now, in this society, we think of OnlyFans and millions of dollars and luxury mansions. But there are a painful amount of third world countries where women rely on sex work to live. Countries where these women are exploited, raped, trafficked. That is not feminist. It's my body, my choice. But if you have to engage in sex work, or you are going to be homeless, or you aren't going to be able to put food on the table, you aren't going to have somewhere to live, is it really your choice? Sex work is not the life of Anna Paul and luxury mansions and $1 million cars. That is not what sex work looks like for the majority of sex workers. On the Reality Check Show podcast, Bonnie Blue went on and said that she thinks it's okay for women to cheat on their husbands if they're having sex with her. And that's because women are lazy. And if you ask a man when the last time his partner went down on him, he'd probably say it's been a long time. So she's just giving them what the wives can't. Not wanting to suck your husband, boyfriend, or anyone's dick, for that matter, does not make you lazy. It means that you have autonomy and only want to have sex when you consent to it, which are normal things to need and want. Some of the promotion that is coming along with Lily Phillips and Bonnie Blue and many other sex workers that post on social media is they themselves are pushing this misogynistic discourse. They're adding to it. They're pushing this rhetoric that women shouldn't have autonomy over their bodies, that they are objects. They use language like being run through. Lily Phillips recently made a video talking about how she'd been run through by 101 guys. That is not empowering. Discourse like that and promotion like that feeds directly into the patriarchy. There is no shame in being a sex worker. If you're an OnlyFans creator or if you're Bonnie Blue, you are still worthy of love. You're still worthy as a human being and your value does not decrease. But just because you make that choice and you make millions of dollars and you have a luxury mansion and you've paid off your mum and dad's mortgage does not mean that you work in an industry that supports you. Sex work industry has never and probably will never work in women's favor. The sex industry would not exist without the abuse of women, and we need to remember that.
People think a woman's greatest fear is like never getting married, never falling in love, never having kids. Baby, my biggest fear is me being with a man and that man is somewhere out with his friends and they all sit around talking and he goes, oh yeah, no, she ain't going nowhere. Me? Are you talking about me? I'm frightened thinking about it. I'm having nightmares. I remember it was a video circulating a couple months ago of a celebrity couple. I don't know who this was. It might have been light-skinned Keisha. Now that I think about it, I think it was her and her man, and the topic of cheating came up, and he said something to the effect of, if I cheated on you, you wouldn't leave. And she tried to sit there and go back and forth with him like, yes, I would. And he was like, yeah, okay. First of all, embarrassing. Second of all, the worst part of that video is I could look in her face and tell he wasn't lying. That man was not lying. He was telling the truth and she knew it. Talk about scary, baby. I'm frightened. I'm shaking in my boots right now. Couldn't be me. Couldn't be me. Can't be me. Won't be me.
That video of the gay man shoving Brittany Broski out of the way to do the apple dance is pretty much a snapshot of the way women are treated in the gay community.
Okay, can we actually talk about this? Because this is a really difficult conversation to start, especially because it can be difficult to talk about another disadvantaged community without it sounding like an attack. It's not at all how this is intended. And to be clear, I don't know exactly how the original poster identifies, but I do want to thank them for bringing this up. This is a topic that is more easily broached by members of the queer community and specifically gay men. I have had my fair share of messed up experiences where people have felt entitled to my body, but by far the most overt and constant and unabashed versions of this have happened at the hands of gay men, and I was expected to laugh about it every time. Ultimately, of course, the issue is that we exist in a patriarchy, and yes, the patriarchy has victimized all groups, really, but you are still men. And this does go in both directions to a certain extent, but there is a lot of objectification, especially of women, in a way that's like celebrated and seen as part of gay culture, being like overly critical of women's choices and their bodies and, you know, whatever, as well as, of course, misogyny. We have collectively talked about how straight women often feel entitled to queer spaces because they feel safer there. But I don't think we've talked nearly enough about the ways in which women are also made unsafe in those same spaces. Not all men, but all types of men. Before I start, if you check the comments here, thank you to everyone who shared their experiences, by the way, you'll see that this is something that queer women, NBs, trans men and women, even some gay men themselves have either witnessed or experienced, and it's a conversation that seems like a lot of people want to be had. What a lot of people seem to forget is that queer men have historically been marginalized because of their perceived adjacence to femininity. And in our patriarchy, femininity is seen as just inherently bad or less than. So while queer male culture has embraced and adopted some aspects of femininity or hyper-femininity, that doesn't mean that it hasn't also embraced the ways in which the patriarchal structure will reward them for hating women or mistreating women. In the same way that in a patriarchy, women will also be rewarded for mistreating other women. And some women will in fact embrace that. Embracing femininity selectively doesn't mean that you can't still hate women. Otherwise, white women with braids couldn't possibly be racist. There is a small handful of men in my comments, because of course it's men, basically trying to minimize these experiences, most commonly chalking them up to this invasion of queer spaces by women. They're kind of inadvertently proving my point, because while I again acknowledge the problem of straight women invading queer spaces and also crossing certain lines, the majority of these comments from what I saw don't even specify straight women. They simply say the problem is that women are in queer or gay spaces. Do you see the issue here? You are engaging in the full erasure of women from the queer community because to you, they don't count. Straight men have at least one main reason to pretend to respect women, even if it is like the absolute bare minimum amount, even less than the bare minimum most of the time, let's be real. But I think this might play into the sort of overcorrection we can sometimes see men engage in queer spaces, which could be seen as this very performative and public rejection of even just the minimal regard shown towards women. It's almost meant to fly in the face of the patriarchal rules keeping men minimally in check, which is why we see so much of this rejection and exclusion of women, NBs, and trans men and women within the queer community as well, all while dismissing these claims as being phobic. All this despite the fact that historically it is cis queer men, especially white ones, who could most easily pass as a member of the patriarchal ruling class when stepping outside of queer safe spaces, whereas women cannot shed their status as a woman, much like, of course, men and women of color outside these spaces. And by the way, when asked, I do round up and say that I'm mostly straight. So granted, I'm probably not the best poster child to be having this conversation, but I have still been victimized by some of these behaviors, and I do feel like I should be allowed to speak on my experience. And despite the fact that the reason that when I am assumed to be straight, I literally say sure, is because I also have internalized erasure from these spaces. I don't feel welcome. I know I'm not welcome. And it feels like stolen valor, which I happen to know is a very common experience. It should not be viewed as an attack to talk about how other people have in fact been attacked.
Cat's Eye just like won Halloween already. They literally just posted their group Halloween costume and it is so good. They went as the Women's Club and they each have character accurate costumes. If you know me and you know my page, I love getting as close to one-to-one recreations as possible, and they basically did that. My jaw literally dropped. They look so good. Megan went as Bloom, Daniela went as Stella, Sophia is Musa, Che is Tekna, Manon is Flora, Laura is Layla. We even have a picture of them doing the iconic touch pose. Hopefully we get a Halloween dance practice video of them in their costume.
Yeah, I don't know why Donald Trump went into politics when he should have been a comedian. Awful guy, but he's funny. I'll give him that. I'm a hater, not a liar, okay? This man said Kamala is at a dance party with Beyonce. Hilarious. We're still not voting for you though.